Tonight, we turn to a quieter and heavier chapter of history, one that unfolded not on battlefields or in royal courts, but behind high stone walls and locked laundry doors. We are looking at the Magdalene Laundries, the institutions where thousands of women and girls were confined, made to labor without pay, and stripped of their names and their freedom, often for nothing more than being poor, unmarried, orphaned, or simply thought to be inconvenient. This is not a story we will dress up or make light of. It deserves to be told gently, honestly, and with respect for the women who lived it. Now, dim the lights, settle somewhere warm and safe, and let your breathing slow tonight as you breathing slow. Tonight as you begin to drift, let your mind travel back to a time when a young woman could vanish from her own life through a single convent door and disappear, sometimes for the rest of her days. Who were these women really? How did they come to be there? What did their long days sound like, and smell like, and feel like, and feel like? Let us step softly into their world and listen. To understand the Magdalene Laundries, you first have to picture the buildings themselves. Tall and gray and shuttered against the ordinary life of the streets outside, in cities like Dublin, Cork, Limerick, and Waterford, these were large convent complexes with chapels, dormitories, and at their hearts, vast, steaming laundry halls. From the road, they looked respectable, even peaceful. But behind the gates was a closed world with its own rules, its own silences, and its own quiet economy built on the labor of women who had not chosen to be there. The walls were not just brick and mortar. They were a boundary between one kind of life and another. And once a girl crossed them, coming back out again was rarely up to her. High perimeter walls ran the length of the grounds, often topped with iron or broken glass, so that even the sky seemed to be portioned out carefully. A woman inside might spend years within a space measured in a few hundred steps. The world she had known, the shops and lanes and familiar faces of home, might lie only a street away, and yet it was as far from her reach as another country. What made the walls so effective was not only their height, but the respectability that surrounded them. To the townspeople passing on the outside, a convent was a place of holiness and charity. No one wished to imagine what the daily reality might be for those held within, and so no one looked too closely. The very reverence people felt for the church became, in a strange way, another wall, a barrier of assumption that kept the curiosity out. As surely as the stone kept the women in, the laundries took their name from Mary Magdalene, the woman in the Gospels long portrayed as a repentant sinner made clean. The earliest of them opened in the 1700s, and at first many women came and went of their own accord. They were meant to be refuges where so-called fallen women could be reformed through prayer, discipline, and hard work, and then return to society made new. But over the long years that followed, the meaning of the name curdled. What had begun as a shelter slowly hardened into something closer to a prison. And the word Magdalene, once tied to mercy, became for many women a mark that would follow them all their lives. To see how the laundries came to hold so many, we must follow the different roads that led a woman through those gates. Some were brought by their own families, quietly, in the dark, an unmarried daughter whose pregnancy had shamed the household. Some were sent by priests who knew of a girl who had grown too spirited or too pretty for a small Paris comfort. Some came from orphanages and industrial schools, handed on when they aged out of one institution and straight into another. Some were referred by the courts, and some simply had nowhere else on earth to go. What united them was that almost none of them arrived by real choice. Consider the most common path of all. The unmarried daughter found to be expecting a child. In the Ireland of that era, such news could fall upon a family like a catastrophe rather than weather the shame. Many families chose to make the problem disappear. A quiet word with the local priest, an arrangement with the sisters, and the daughter would be gone, spirited away before the pregnancy showed. She might leave home believing she would return in a matter of months. For a great many, that return never came. However they arrived, the moment of entry marked a hard break in a life. The first thing the institution would take from her before the work even began was the very name she had carried her whole life. On entering, many women were given a new name, sometimes the name of a saint, sometimes simply a number, and told this was who they would be now. Their old clothes were taken and replaced with a plain uniform. Their hair in some places was cut short. The justification offered was spiritual humility, the shedding of the vain self. But to a frightened 17-year-old standing in a cold hall, being told she was no longer called by the name her mother had given her, it was something closer to erasure, the quiet undoing of a person before the work had even begun. This unmaking of the person extended into the very air of the place, into a rule that governed even the most human of acts. In many of these laundries, silence was law. Women worked, ate, and moved through their days without speaking, or speaking only when permitted. Conversation was seen as an occasion for gossip, complaint, or worse, and so it was simply forbidden across long stretches of the day. Imagine a room full of people, dozens of them, laboring shoulder to shoulder in heat and steam, and hearing almost nothing but the slap of wet cloth and the hiss of the presses. The silence was meant to encourage reflection and penance. What it often produced instead was isolation, a loneliness that could sit inside a crowded room. There is a great difference between a silence freely chosen by those who have taken vows and a silence imposed upon women who never asked for it. The natural human impulse, when thrown together with others in hardship, is to talk, to share the burden, to make a joke, to offer comfort. To have it forbidden was to be cut off from one another even while pressed close together all day long. A woman could stand beside the same companion at the same washtub for years and know almost nothing of her, because the words that would have built a friendship were never allowed to pass between them, and yet the silence was never quite complete, because the human need for connection is not so easily crushed. A glance held a moment longer than necessary could carry sympathy. A word breathed under the noise of the machines, when the sister's attention was elsewhere, could mean everything. The laundries were called laundries because that is exactly what they were. Large commercial operations, washing the linen of the outside world. Hotels, hospitals, schools, army barracks, and private households send their sheets and shirts and tablecloths to be cleaned, and the women inside did the cleaning. It was heavy, punishing physical labor. Sheets soaked in scalding water grew enormously heavy. Great mangles and presses pushed steam into the air until it clung to skin and hair and lungs. Hands were scrubbed raw and red day after day, year after year, and for all of it, the women were paid nothing at all. Their labor produced real income, but that income went to the institutions, not to the workers whose bodies earned it. In plain terms, this was labor extracted without compensation from people who could not leave. Life in the laundry ran to the sound of bells. A woman rose early, often before dawn, to the ringing that marked the start of the day. There was mass, and then breakfast, and then the long hours of work, broken only by more prayer and more meals taken in silence. The rhythm was relentless and unchanging, one gray day folding into the next, with almost nothing to tell them apart. There were no weekends as such, no holidays that felt like holidays, no sense that time was moving toward anything. For someone accustomed to the small freedoms of ordinary life, the sheer sameness of it could be its own kind of weight, a clock that ticked without ever seeming to bring the hour of release. In an ordinary life, even a hard and poor one, the days carry small variations that mark the passage of time. Inside the laundry, such markers were largely stripped away, with so few landmarks to measure it against. Time lost its shape. Weeks blurred into months and months into years, and a woman might struggle to say how long she had been there. There was no sense of building toward anything, no project reaching completion, no future dates circled in hope. The clock ticked, the bell rang, the work was done and done again, and still nothing changed. Food in the laundries was plain and often sparse. Breakfast might be porridge and bread and weak tea. The other meals leaned on bread, potatoes, and whatever cheap and filling fare the kitchens could produce. Accounts from women who lived it describe being frequently hungry, of meals that were nutritionally thin, and portions that never quite matched the demands of a body doing hard labor all day. To be always a little hungry on top of everything else wore at the spirit as surely as the work wore at the hands. Meals were not moments of comfort or gathering, but simply refueling, taken quickly and quietly under watchful eyes. Some women, against all odds, attempted escape. To run required courage, or desperation, or both. There were high walls to be gotten over, locked gates to be gotten through. But clearing the wall was only the beginning of the difficulty. A woman who succeeded in getting out found herself in a world where she possessed nothing. She had no money, for she had been paid nothing for her years of labor. She had no friends to shelter her, no home to return to that would take her in. She often no longer even had a name the world would know her by. And cruelest of all, the world outside was frequently no ally. The same society that had built and tolerated the Laundries was not inclined to protect their runaways. A woman found wandering might be returned by the police, by a priest, or even by her own family, who saw in her flight not a cry for freedom, but fresh evidence of the waywardness that had supposedly justified her confinement. The last Magdalene Laundry in Ireland did not close until 1996. For most of the 20th century, the institutions continued to operate, their existence known but unremarked, their inmates largely forgotten by the world outside. It was only in later years, as survivors began to speak, that the full weight of what had happened there came to be acknowledged. In 2011, the Irish government issued a formal apology, recognizing the women who had been confined, the labor they had been forced to perform, and the silence that had surrounded them for so long. Many survivors did not live to hear it. The story of the Magdalene Laundries is not a comfortable one to hold. It speaks of a society that preferred not to look too closely at what was being done in its name, and of an institution that lost sight of mercy somewhere along the way. But it is also a story about endurance, about women who survived what was done to them, who held on to their names in the privacy of their own minds, even when the world refused to use them, and who at last, after long years, came to be remembered. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, hold them gently in your thoughts, the women behind the walls, and let their silence be broken at last by the simple act of being heard.